And good morning once again, my brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ, at Living Hope Community Church, Iglesia Esperanza Viviente, and throughout the world. I want to welcome you one more time to another Living Hope Today study. Thank you for being here. Thank you for wanting to learn God's Word with me. Today we find ourselves in Mark 15. Pilate's got a big problem on his hands. The Jews have already had their trial. They've already determined that Jesus is guilty of blasphemy because he's told them the truth. Okay, now they send him to Pilate because Pilate's the Roman governor. Pilate's the one that has the authority to execute Jesus. Capital punishment was not given to the Jewish nation. It was taken from them. Okay, well, Pilate's been interrogating Jesus. Pilate sent Jesus to Herod. Herod sent him back. They're trying to figure out why the Jewish leadership wants to kill him. He hasn't done anything. Well, Pilate finally figures out they're trying to kill him out of jealousy. And in the end, we're going to see today that Jesus suffers unimaginably. Just to go to the story, we're told in verse 16, the soldiers led him away inside the palace. Now he's with Pilate in the palace, that is the governor's headquarters, and they called together a whole battalion. I mean, this is a lot of soldiers, right? What do these guys do? Well, they're trained killers. This is what they do. They're trained killers. In fact, I don't think they have remorse in them, right? I mean, they have been trained to do this. They have found this seemingly defenseless guy named Jesus who has been handed to them. What are they supposed to do with him? Well, they're going to torture him. And that's what it says. They clothed him in a purple cloak. What is that significance? The significance of purple is often associated in the ancient world with royalty. So for them to clothe him in purple, not green, not yellow, not blue, purple, they're mocking his claim to be the King of the Jews. And they twist together a crown of thorns. We're not sure how thick and long those thorns were, but they're obviously thick and long enough to penetrate skin and cause great pain. All right, so they take that crown of thorns, they slam it on top of his head. If you've ever had a cut on your head, you know how your head bleeds worst of all. Okay, so you can just see the blood running down Jesus' face from all around his head. His purple cloak is getting stained. And what are they doing? Well, they began to salute him. What mockery, right? Hail, King of the Jews. I'm sure to these soldiers looking at this pitiful example of a person who is apparently completely defenseless. They don't know what he's been charged with. They probably don't care. This is the fun part of the job to them. They get to torture somebody, and eventually, hopefully to them anyway, they get to kill him. This is part of what they've been trained to do and what they relish. Okay, hail, King of the Jews. So Jesus, God in the flesh, the creator and sustainer of life, the one who emptied himself of his glory to come to this earth to be obedient unto death, even death on a cross, as we're told in Philippians 2. He's standing there bloody and beaten as they mock him. The story goes forward, and they were striking his head with a reed. Okay, this is some kind of stick, right? That's what they're doing. They're hitting him over the head. Well, if you're wearing a crown of thorns, that becomes a real problem, right? I mean, that hurts like crazy, I'm sure. They're spitting on him. This is the ultimate form of insult available even today. Spit in somebody's face and see what happens, right? I mean, it's just a degrading action. And as if that's not enough, they're kneeling down before him in homage to him. Oh, Jesus, we're worshiping you. This is a total travesty of truth. This is the Lord himself putting himself in a position to suffer. Why? Because the The cultural expectation of the Messiah has been wrong all along. They expected a Messiah to be a conqueror, to be a peacemaker, to be one who puts Israel above the rest once more, who vanquishes the enemies and brings peace to the land. Instead, God's plan. The Messiah would be a suffering servant. The Messiah would be one who is taken over by his enemies for a time so that he can be the sacrificial Lamb of God that God requires to appease his wrath. God's going to satisfy his justice by coming to earth to die on behalf of all the sin that's ever been committed, to experience the pain of God's wrath against evil. This is what's happening. The Lord has willfully, knowingly accepted his Father's purpose and is now suffering, about to be sacrificed. Well, let's jump out of here for a second and go to John 19, because this fills in some details about the politics of what's happening here. Once more, Pilate. Now, we would assume that Pilate's trying to beat Jesus to a pulp for one purpose, to bring him back out to the Jewish leadership and say, look, isn't this enough? Look at this. We've beaten him. We've punished him. Whatever you're claiming he's done, he has paid the price for it. Let's just have peace, right? Let's just settle this without having to kill somebody. But, of course, the Jewish rulers are not going to be satisfied with that. But watch what happens. Once more, Pilate came out and said to the Jews, look, I'm bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him. What's happening here? Look at this bloody, beaten mess of a man. He's probably barely able to stand. And I don't see anything wrong with this guy, is what Pilate's saying. And when Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, here is the man. Look, he's been punished. We don't even have a charge. We don't even really have a legal right to punish him. But here he is. Are you guys satisfied? Well, as soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, crucify, crucify. No, we're not satisfied. We want him dead. But Pilate answered, you take him and crucify him. Notice that in John 19:6. Pilate's saying, I'm going to abdicate the Roman rule right to capital punishment, and I'm going to give it to you. You guys go ahead. You want to crucify him so bad? I don't want to be involved in this. I don't see any charge against him. My wife has warned me against this. You guys crucify him. You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him. I don't know why you guys hate him so much. But the Jews insisted, we have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God. What does that mean to Pilate? Well, maybe that scares Pilate a little bit, but it shouldn't mean too much. I mean, you guys think he's violated one of your religious rules? Okay, I still don't have a good reason to crucify him, right? When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. Uh-oh, who is this guy? And he went back inside the palace. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. Pilate wants to interrogate Jesus again. Listen, I'm a little afraid now. What if you are some sort of God? Remember, in the Roman world at the time, the pagan belief was that there are hundreds of gods. And obviously Pilate's heard of this Nazarene who's healed so many people and brought health and well-being to so many over many years. Well, Jesus doesn't answer. Jesus doesn't answer. All the evidence is out there. Jesus is not going to give Pilate the answer. Pilate gets offended. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said, don't you realize I have the power either to free you or to crucify you? I have life or death in my hand, Jesus. Don't you want to respond? And Jesus answered, you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. Who handed me over to you? Well, that would be the Jewish leadership. But Jesus is telling Pilate, what? Hey, You think you're the ruler? There's somebody a lot bigger than you that has control of this whole situation. If heaven hadn't given you the authority to do this, you would have not been able to do it. And from then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free. I don't want to have anything to do with this. But the Jews kept shouting, if you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. Well, now they're getting right into Pilate's wheelhouse here to say, Pilate, if you don't do this for us, we're going to take this to Rome, and we're going to accuse you of having another king other than Caesar. And once we do that, guess what Rome's going to do to you, Pilate? Pilate's completely leveraged here. What does he do? When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the stone pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of Passover week. That's Friday, about the 6th hour. That's 6 a.m. Here is your king, Pilate said to the Jews. I'm sorry, the 6th hour would be noon. Here is your king, Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away. Take him away. Crucify him. Shall I crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar, the chief priest answered. What hypocrisy. Oh, now we're going to be faithful Roman citizens. We like Caesar now. We want to kill Jesus so desperately that we're willing to do anything. Well, let's go back to Mark for a second. When they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak. They put on his own clothes on him, and they led him out to crucify him. They're still, Pilate's given up, right? Let's get rid of him then. If that's a big deal to you guys, I don't know why you want to kill him. He hasn't done anything, but okay. I don't want to be reported on with Rome. Let me get rid of this guy. Maybe you guys will leave me alone. They led him out to crucify him. Now, I just want to take you through a few passages. In Mark 10, you remember a few chapters ago, Jesus is speaking and says, when the Son of Man falls into the hands of the enemy, they will mock him, they will spit on him, they will flog him, and they will kill him. We are seeing the exact fulfillment of Jesus' words in Mark 15 as they persecute Jesus without charge. And after 3 days he will rise, and we will see that soon enough in the gospel as he rises from the dead. But I want to take you to Isaiah and just bring you to the fact that God had always intended his Messiah to suffer on the first visit. I gave my back to those who strike, and my cheeks to those who pull out the beard. I hid not my face from disgrace and from spitting. This is literally 700 years before the cross. Isaiah 52:14, as many were astonished at you, his appearance was so marred beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. In other words, the scourging was absolutely overwhelming. As we remember from Isaiah 53, he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hid their faces, he was despised. We esteemed him not. Surely he's borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him the chastisement that brought us peace. And with his wounds we are healed. He took the punishment for us. That's the message of Isaiah 53. That's what God is really doing here. But I want to take you back to the New Testament for a minute as we conclude today. I know we've covered a lot of ground, but let's finish Isaiah 53 first. We all like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Again, here we are in the Old Testament having the cross explained to us. Why does God allow himself to become the persecuted one? Why does he allow himself to be killed on a cross? Because he is receiving God's wrath against sin. What does this do? Let me just take you to the New Testament for a second. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, Paul is talking to the Corinthians here, and he says, look, God came and God was tortured. God came to earth and God died. You're crazy to think that. Even today, we have people that would make that same sort of conclusion. But to us who are being saved, it's the power of God. If you understand the problem of sin, our own evil, our own inability to be restored to God, we see the cross now in a different light. It's because of the cross that we have the capacity through God's mercy and grace to know God and to be restored. For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. In other words, God's wisdom is wiser than us. For those who want to just ignore what God's doing and live for themselves and consider their spiritual life good enough for God, their wisdom is not enough. But God said, look, I'm sending my Messiah to die, and through that cross you can be redeemed, and though the world might consider it foolish, it's the power of God to save all who believe. Jews demand miraculous signs, and Greeks look for wisdom. We can't give them miraculous signs, and we can't give them wisdom. What can we give them? We give them Christ crucified. We preach Christ crucified. And how is that received? Well, it's a stumbling block to the Jews. Why? The Messiah was never intended to be a suffering servant in the mind of the Jew, right? The Messiah was always supposed to be a conqueror. And as God has ordained it, the Messiah will be a conqueror when he comes the second time. But the first time, he's a stumbling block to the Jews. God is tortured and God is crucified. Makes no sense to the rational human mind. And it's foolish to the Gentiles. In other words, looking at the plan of God through human perspective yields you a cross that doesn't make sense. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greek, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than man's wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than man's strength. There it is. What are we to do with the cross? We're to understand that God suffers intensely on our behalf. We're to understand how serious our sin is. In order to appease the wrath of God against sin, God had to take this on himself to maintain his holiness and his justice. Incredible. Sometimes we treat our sin as if, it's no big deal. God doesn't treat it that way. It required the death of his Messiah. And we'll continue to pursue it as we continue in Mark 15. But church, just know how much God loves you. He bought us back and paid the price of his own life so that we might know him. God bless you, church. Serve him well today.